What if the man who forced you into marriage wasn't the villain, but the only one who ever truly saw you? Stay with us to the end, because this story might just change the way you see love. And if you enjoy these emotional journeys, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. Let's begin. The scent of cedarwood hung heavy in the air, curling through the dim corridors of Blackidge Manor like a whispered warning. Somewhere deep in the heart of this castle on the hill, beneath chandeliers that glittered with cold indifference, I stood. 24 years old, draped in white satin that felt more like shackles than silk. The grand hall stretched out before me, lined with strangers who barely glanced my way. They weren't here for me. They were here for him. Damian Cross. The man who had built an empire so vast it cast shadows over every deal in New England. The man who, tonight, would take me as his wife not out of love, not even out of desire, but out of convenience. A transaction sealed by my father's ruin. I clutched the bouquet tighter, the stems digging into my palms as I dared to lift my gaze to where he stood. Damian Cross, 38, tall, striking in his charcoal suit, and colder than the Vermont winter that pressed against the manor's stone walls. His jaw was set like chiseled granite, his dark hair brushed back without a single strand out of place. He didn't look at me, not once. His focus remained on the priest, his expression unreadable, like a man closing a deal rather than vowing a life. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as the ceremony began. The words floated around me, distant and hollow. To have and to hold. Hold what? A stranger's hand? A future that wasn't mine? I glanced toward the guests. Polished faces, glassy smiles, all of them pretending not to notice how stiffly I stood, how Damian kept his distance. When the priest finally asked the question, the air seemed to still. Do you, Damian Cross, take Isabel Moore to be your lawfully wedded wife? The silence was deafening. I dared to hope, for a second, that he might refuse, that he might walk away and release me from this gilded cage. But his voice cut through the stillness like a blade. I do. 2 words. Sharp. Mechanical. Nothing. More than an execution of duty. And then it was my turn. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. I felt my knees threaten to give way beneath the weight of everything I was sacrificing. My freedom, my dignity, my heart. I thought of my father sitting in a hospital bed, frail and beaten down by debt. I thought of my mother, gone too soon, her whispered lessons on loyalty and honor echoing in my heart. I do, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The priest pronounced us husband and wife. There was no kiss. No soft touch of reassurance, only the quiet scratch of a pen as Damian signed the marriage certificate like he was finalizing a merger. The moment the ink dried, he turned away, already retreating into the shadows of the manor. My heart clenched. I stood there, abandoned, in a sea of glittering chandeliers and polished marble, the weight of my choice pressing down on me like a stone. Later that night, I found myself in a guest wing I had never seen before. A sprawling bedroom, too large for one person, too cold for something called home. My suitcase, small, worn, so painfully out of place, sat on the edge of the velvet chaise. I sank down beside it, my fingers brushing the weathered leather strap. Something shifted inside, a loose flap, slightly torn. I slipped my hand inside, expecting nothing, but feeling the corner of something soft and worn. A letter. The paper trembled in my hand as I unfolded it. The handwriting, small and delicate, hit me like a whisper from the grave. If you ever find something worth forgiving, hold on to it. My mother's voice seemed to fill the room, wrapping around me like the lavender-scented shawl she used to wear when she sang to me in our tiny kitchen back home. I pressed the letter to my chest, choking back the tears I'd fought all day. Was this marriage something worth forgiving? Could I ever see past the coldness, the transaction? The fact that I had been bought like a commodity? I stood, walking, to the window that overlooked the darkened gardens below. The balcony loomed just beyond, bathed in pale moonlight. I could almost hear the wind calling me outside, to stand on that edge and feel something, anything, that reminded me I was still alive, but I couldn't move, not yet. Instead, I leaned my forehead against the glass, clutching the letter, letting the ache in my chest spill out in silent tears. Somewhere, deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of a war I wasn't ready to fight. A war between duty and desire, between what I owed and what I longed for. And standing on the other side of that battlefield was Damian Cross, the man who had just become my husband. I closed my eyes, whispering the words again, as if they might anchor me through the storm ahead. If you ever find something worth forgiving, I didn't know yet if I had. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I awoke the next morning in a bed that felt far too grand for a woman who hadn't slept a single moment. The silk sheets tangled around my legs, but no warmth lingered in them. The space beside me was untouched, empty, like the vows we'd exchanged the night before. Damian Cross hadn't come to claim his bride. A part of me should have felt relief. But what I felt instead was a gnawing hollowness, like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if I wanted to fall. Or if I already had. I rose quietly, wrapping my shawl around my shoulders, the one my mother had knitted in the final months of her life, when her hands shook so badly she'd dropped stitches. I never fixed those stitches. Somehow, their imperfections felt more real than anything else I owned. After washing and dressing, I wandered through the manor's silent hallways, my footsteps muffled by thick rugs. No one acknowledged me. I wasn't sure if they even knew who I was, or if they cared. The staff moved like shadows, avoiding eye contact as though I carried some invisible mark of shame. I didn't know where I was going until I found myself standing outside the garage, my heart pounding in my chest. The car was waiting. I had called ahead. I didn't belong in this cold mansion. Not when my father was lying in a sterile room in a small-town care center an hour away, alone and likely wondering if I had survived the night. The drive was silent, save for the hum of tires on wet pavement. I stared out the window, tracing the outlines of trees blurred by fog. When we arrived, I stepped out quickly, my breath catching at the familiar sight of the brick building where my father had been living since his health collapsed along with his company. Room 206. I knew the path by heart. When I stepped inside, my heart sank. He looked smaller than I remembered, frail against the white sheets, his skin pale and thin. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of the door, and when he saw me, he tried to sit up, grimacing with the effort. "Belle." His voice cracked like dry leaves beneath my feet. "You shouldn't be here today." I crossed the room quickly, sitting beside him, taking his cool, veined hand in mine. Where else would I be? His eyes glistened with something I couldn't name. Was it guilt? Relief? Both, maybe. "You're a married woman now," he whispered, his throat tight. "You have a new life." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Do I?" He winced, closing his eyes as if my words struck deeper than they should have. I looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the weak hum of the heater, the small bouquet of wildflowers I had left on the windowsill days ago, now wilting. "How are you paying for this place, Dad?" I asked softly, brushing my thumb over his knuckles. I know the company is gone, and I know the debt didn't just disappear. His lips parted as if to answer, but something in his face shifted. Hesitation, fear. He turned his head away. You shouldn't worry about that, but I did worry. I always had. I pressed again, leaning in. Tell me the truth. His mouth trembled, but the words never came. He simply squeezed my hand and whispered, "Forgive me." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. Later that afternoon, I returned to Blackidge, clutching my mother's shawl tighter as I climbed the marble stairs toward the east wing. I had seen no sign of Damian all day. Perhaps he had left the manor. Or perhaps he was still here, hiding behind walls I couldn't yet breach. As I reached the landing, I heard muted voices. My name. I froze, pressing myself against the wall just out of sight. "The payments have been made on time every month," a woman's voice said, clipped and professional. "The care facility confirmed receipt again this morning." "And the floral shop." Damian's voice, deep, low, and unmistakably his. My breath hitched. "Yes, sir. The taxes and outstanding lease have all been covered." "Good." A pause. "Make sure she doesn't know." "Yes, Mr. Cross." My knees nearly gave out. It was him. It had been him all along. He had been paying for my father's care. For my flower shop. Before the wedding. Before I ever agreed to wear his ring. Why? I stumbled back down the stairs, my pulse racing. I didn't stop until I reached the small reading room tucked near the back of the manor, the one no one ever seemed to use. I collapsed onto the leather armchair by the window, pressing my hand over my racing heart. He had let me believe I was nothing but a transaction, a burden. Yet behind closed doors, he had been quietly protecting the very things I loved most. I stared out the window, down at the balcony below. The same balcony where I'd stood the night before, clutching my mother's letter, wondering if anything in this marriage was worth forgiving. My fingers trembled as I reached into my pocket, unfolding the worn paper again. If you ever find something worth forgiving, hold on to it. Was this it? Was this the beginning of something more? I didn't have answers yet. But for the first time since I walked down that aisle, I wanted to know. I avoided him for days after that overheard conversation. I told myself I was being cautious, that I needed time to understand his motives. But the truth was far simpler. I was afraid. Afraid that if I confronted him, I might find myself unraveling faster than I was ready for. The walls of Blackidge grew heavier by the day. Marble floors and high-arched ceilings couldn't hide how empty the place felt. I wandered through silent halls, breathing in the faint scent of cedar that seemed to cling to everything in this house, including me. And yet, I noticed things I hadn't before. The fresh flowers in every room, wildflowers, like the ones I used to pick with my mother in the meadow behind our house. The untouched tea set, placed on the reading table in the morning, Earl Grey with honey, the same way I used to make it for myself at the shop. He was watching me, quietly, from a distance. And still, I ran from every encounter. Until that night, it started like all the others. A dinner neither of us truly touched, followed by the soft clink of Damian's glass as he dismissed the staff with a nod. I sat at the far end of the table, picking at the hem of my dress, avoiding his eyes. When I finally stood to leave, his voice cut through the air like velvet steel. "Stay." I froze. Slowly, I turned to face him. He leaned back in his chair, jacket unbuttoned, the top of his shirt slightly loosened as if even his perfectly sculpted control had grown tired. His dark eyes studied me, unreadable. "Why do you keep running from me, Isabel?" His voice was low, almost tired. I swallowed. "I'm not running. I'm surviving." He stood then, moving toward me with measured steps. My breath hitched, but I held my ground until he stopped a few feet away. "You think I don't see you watching me when you think I'm not looking?" His jaw clenched. You think I don't feel you slipping away every chance you get? I backed toward the French doors that led to the balcony, my pulse hammering in my throat. The cool night air rushed over my skin as I stepped outside, the marble beneath my bare feet freezing me in place. He followed. I stood at the edge, gripping the stone railing as if it might steady me. The moon hung low, painting the garden in pale silver. It was too quiet, too charged. You want the truth? I whispered, barely daring to look at him. He said nothing, but I felt him move closer. The heat of his presence wrapped around me like an unseen rope, pulling tighter with every breath. I was terrified of you the day I said I do, I admitted, my voice trembling. You were everything I feared, a man who could buy my life and never look back. A man who didn't even care to hold my hand. He flinched, just barely. I turned, forcing my eyes to meet his. But you were there. You were there before the contract. You paid for my father's care. You saved the only piece of my life I thought I still had left. My shop. Why? He took one slow step toward me, then another, until there was barely a breath between us. Because I wanted to, he murmured. I shook my head, fighting the heat rising in my chest. No, that's not enough. What do you want from me, Damian? Why bring me here? Why marry me if you don't even want me? His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. He stood there, locked in some silent war with himself, until, finally, he exhaled, like a dam breaking. You think I don't want you? His voice cracked, quiet, rough, but raw. I have wanted you every damn day since I first saw you standing behind that flower shop counter, looking like you belonged to a world I could never touch. I sucked in a breath, stunned. My fingers tightened on the railing, unsure whether to hold on or let go. He took another step, closing the distance, his hand bracing on the stone beside my head. His breath mingled with mine, warm and uneven. You don't see it, do you? He whispered, his eyes dark with something I couldn't name. I have built walls my whole life. And you. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly brushing mine. You are the only one who makes me want to tear them down. My breath hitched, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. His hand hovered near my face, hesitant, trembling, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to touch me. You said you were terrified, he whispered. But the truth is, I'm the one who's terrified. Terrified you'll leave, that you'll take whatever this is and walk away, just like everyone else has. I felt my chest cave in, the weight of his words crushing whatever distance still stood between us. My mother's words echoed in my mind, soft and haunting. If you ever find something worth forgiving. I reached up, slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. He flinched, like my touch burned him. His breath shuddered. Why would I leave? I whispered, my voice cracking. If you finally stopped pushing me away. His eyes closed for a moment, as if the ache of those words nearly undid him. And when he opened them again, I saw it. The fear, the longing, the man beneath the mask. Without another word, his hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me gently, almost reverently toward him. His lips brushed mine, feather-light, hesitant, as if he was giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't, and when he kissed me again, firm, desperate, full of every unspoken word, I knew the walls had started to fall. I barely slept after, that night on the balcony. I lay awake for hours, tracing the memory of his whispered confession over and over in my mind. Every breath we had shared felt like a fragile thread, tying me to something I hadn't dared to hope for. Something that scared me even more than the silence that had lived between us until now. He had let me in. Just for a moment. And yet, morning came like a cold wave, pushing me back to reality. I sat on the window seat in my bedroom, staring at the letter I had read a dozen times but never fully opened. I knew every crease, every faded word, but there was something I had never dared to read past that one sentence. My mother's handwriting danced across the page, delicate and shaky in her final months. My throat tightened as I forced myself to read the rest. Forgiveness, my darling, is heavier than anger. I carried it for years, unsure if I had the right. But I hope one day you'll find the strength I never had. I was there the night your father signed the papers that ruined the Cross family. I begged him not to. I knew it was wrong, but I stood by and watched him take everything from them, thinking we'd finally have peace. Instead, it broke us. It broke him. If you ever face that family again, I pray you'll choose better than I did. My breath caught in my throat. The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. It was true. Everything Damian had lost, everything he had carried on his shoulders, had started with my family. With my father. I pressed the letter to my chest, curling into myself as guilt churned through me like a storm. How could I stay? How could I pretend this marriage was anything more than another cruel chain, binding him to the people who had already stolen so much from him? I had to tell him. The sun was dipping low by the time I gathered the courage to face him again. The manor felt heavier than usual, every step echoing louder than it should have as I made my way toward his study. The door was slightly ajar. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. His shoulders looked heavier tonight, as if the weight of his empire was finally pressing too hard. I took a deep breath and knocked gently. He turned, surprise flickering across his face when he saw me standing there. "Isabel," he said softly, as if tasting my name like a question. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. My hands trembled as I held out the letter. I need you to read this." He set the glass down, approaching me slowly. His brow furrowed as he took the worn paper from my hands. I watched him read, every muscle in my body wound tight with dread. His jaw tensed, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the letter. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like gravel dragging across stone. "You knew?" I shook my head quickly, tears stinging my eyes. "I swear I didn't. Not until now. My mother. She hid it from me. She hid it from all of us." His chest rose and fell heavily as he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "All this time, I thought your family just walked away, untouched by what they did to mine." I felt like I couldn't breathe. I reached for him, but my hand stopped midair. "I didn't know, Damian. But you deserve better than this. You deserve more than a marriage built on debt and guilt." He turned, eyes blazing. "Is that what you think this is now? Just another debt to be paid?" I bit my lip, swallowing down the sob threatening to break loose. "Isn't it?" He closed the distance between us in 2 steps, his hands gripping my arms, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough that I couldn't turn away. "You think I would have let you into my home, into my life, if I didn't want you there." His voice cracked. "I could have walked away, Isabel. I could have let your father rot in that hospital bed. I could have watched your shop close without lifting a finger. But I didn't. Because you felt obligated." "No!" His voice broke, raw and desperate. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you suffering for his mistakes. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge and started being about you." My breath hitched. My knees threatened to buckle beneath the weight of his words. But I knew what I had to do. I can't stay, I whispered, even though my heart screamed otherwise. Not like this. Not knowing I'm just another ghost of your past haunting you. He flinched as if I had struck him. I'm letting you go, I whispered again, even though every word felt like it tore me in two. It's the only way to set us both free. He released me like I had burned him, stepping back, his face crumbling in a way I had never seen before. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his voice hollow. I won't stop you. And that was somehow the cruelest thing of all. Turned, walking toward the door on legs that barely held me up. My hand trembled on the handle. I forced myself to look back one last time. He stood there, holding my mother's letter in his hands like it weighed more than the empire he had built. And I left him in that silent, empty house. I left him, even though every step felt like it might be my last breath, because I loved him enough to let him go. I wish I could say leaving felt like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like tearing out my own heart and leaving it behind on the marble floors of Blackidge Manor. The town I returned to wasn't the same as the one I had left. Or maybe it was me who had changed. My little flower shop sat quietly on the corner of Main Street, its windows dusty, the closed sign still hanging on the door. The once vibrant place where I used to fill vases with sunflowers and wild daisies now looked like a memory long forgotten. I stood in front of it for a long time, clutching my coat tighter around me as the cold Vermont air bit at my skin. A part of me wanted to unlock the door, to step inside and lose myself in the comfort of routine. But I didn't have the strength. Not yet. Instead, I walked the familiar path toward the care home where my father still lay, fighting a battle his body was too tired to win. The nurses smiled softly when they saw me. They didn't ask where I'd been. Maybe they already knew. Small towns have a way of knowing things before you're ready to admit them yourself. Room 206. I pushed the door open slowly. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the flickering fluorescent light. His breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of his chest a quiet battle. He turned his head toward me, his lips curling into the smallest of smiles. Belle. I rushed to his side, sinking onto the chair beside the bed. I took his frail hand in mine, pressing it to my cheek. I'm here, Dad, I whispered. His eyes shimmered with something I couldn't quite name. Regret. Relief. Maybe both. I heard you left him, he rasped, barely more than a breath. I nodded, tears already burning in my throat. You shouldn't have had to marry him, to pay for my mistakes. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle like lead in my chest. It wasn't just your mistake, Dad. We all carried it. He coughed softly, squeezing my hand with what little strength he had left. Your mother. She tried to stop me. I should have listened. The words hung heavy between us, like smoke in a closed room. I found her letter, I whispered. I know the truth now. His hand trembled in mine. I'm sorry, Belle. More than you'll ever know. I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his. I forgive you, Dad. I already have. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye. Don't let this break you. I held him until the nurse came to check his vitals, until visiting hours ended, until the weight of the past felt just a little less heavy on my shoulders. I spent the next week tending to the shop. I cleaned the windows, arranged the shelves, and filled the air with the scent of lavender and rosemary, my mother's favorites. And every morning, without fail, a new bouquet of wildflowers arrived on the doorstep. No note, no signature. But I knew they were from him. One morning, I found a small envelope tucked beneath the bouquet. My heart pounded as I unfolded the paper, expecting some grand declaration, some plea for me to come back. But there were only 4 words. "The shop is yours." I sank to the floor right there on the front steps, clutching the note to my chest as tears spilled down my cheeks. He had let me go. But even in letting me go, he had given me back the one thing I thought I'd lost. Myself. Days blurred into weeks. The shop slowly came back to life. Each new customer a reminder that I could still build something of my own, even from the ashes. But the ache in my chest never fully left. Not when I stood behind the counter, running my fingers over the petals of fresh daisies. Not when I locked up at night, staring out into the empty street, wishing for just one more glimpse of him. Not when I sat by my father's bedside, watching the man who had once been my hero slowly slip away. The night my father passed, I held his hand until his last breath. I whispered all the things I never had the courage to say before. That I forgave him, that I loved him, that I would carry our family's honor forward, in my own way. And when I walked out of that room for the last time, I knew what I had to do. I stood once again on the threshold of Blackidge Manor, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I had come to return his ring, and, if I was honest with myself, to return something far heavier, the piece of my heart I had left behind. I didn't know what waited for me on the other side of those doors, but I knew this much. I wasn't running anymore. It had taken me days to find the strength to return to Blackidge Manor. Days filled with empty spaces and 2 quiet mornings. Days of wildflowers showing up at my doorstep, reminding me of everything I had tried and failed to leave behind. And now, standing in front of that heavy oak door again, I felt the familiar weight in my chest return. I hadn't told anyone. I was coming. I hadn't dared to let myself believe there was anything left to say, but I carried his ring in my coat pocket, clutched so tightly that the delicate metal had nearly left marks in my skin. I took a steadying breath and knocked. No one answered. Part of me considered leaving the ring on the doorstep and walking away, for good. But something in me couldn't do it. Not like that. So I pushed the door open, stepping inside. The manor felt different, like the breath had been pulled from it. No staff, no clinking glasses or quiet footsteps down the hall. The air felt stale, still, like it hadn't been disturbed in days. Had he left? I moved through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. I found myself drawn toward the balcony, the place where so much had changed between us just nights ago. But when I reached the doors, they were closed. The garden beyond lay quiet under the heavy clouds of an oncoming storm. I swallowed back the ache rising in my throat. Turning back toward the front door, my steps faltered as I passed the study. The door stood slightly ajar, and inside, I saw the faintest flicker of light from the desk lamp. I pushed the door open slowly. He was there. Damian stood by the window, his back to me, shoulders hunched in a way I had never seen before. He looked tired, uncertain, as if the weight he carried had finally pressed him to the breaking point. I didn't speak. Not yet. I stepped closer, but before I could find the words, his voice broke the silence. "You came back," he whispered, like he didn't quite believe it himself. I swallowed hard. I shouldn't have left like I did. He turned then, slowly, like every movement cost him something. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. But his eyes, those dark, tormented eyes, looked like they hadn't slept since the day I walked out. "You had every right to leave," he said quietly, his voice raw. "I gave you nothing worth staying for." I shook my head, my throat tightening. That's not true. We stood there, the space between us feeling both impossible and fragile. Came to return this, I whispered, pulling the ring from my pocket and holding it out to him. But I couldn't do it. His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. Why? I blinked back, the tears threatening to fall. Because every morning since I left, you sent wildflowers to my shop. You saved it, Damian. You gave me back the only part of my life I thought was truly mine. He let out a shaky breath, raking a hand through his hair. I didn't do it to buy you back. I know, I whispered. And that's what scares me the most. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood just inches away. His voice dropped to a broken whisper. I've never known how to love someone without ruining them. I reached for him, my hand trembling as I touched his chest, right over the heart I knew he had tried to lock away. You didn't ruin me, I whispered. You saved me, even when I didn't want you to. His breath caught, his eyes darkening, with something I couldn't quite name. Fear, hope, both. But I wasn't done. There's something else you saved, Damian, I said softly, something you didn't even know you were holding on to. He stared at me, searching my face as if the answer might already be written there. My family's honor, I whispered. You could have destroyed us. You could have exposed everything. My father did. But you didn't. You let me walk away with my head held high. You gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. He closed his eyes, a pained breath escaping his lips. I couldn't hurt you. Not even when I wanted to. I swallowed, hard, my heart pounding in my chest. Why? I asked softly. He opened his eyes, stepping even closer, his hand brushing against mine with a hesitation that nearly undid me. Because I love you, Isabel, he whispered, his voice breaking. I have loved you from the moment I first saw. You and I have hated myself for every minute I made you believe otherwise. My breath hitched, tears spilling down my cheeks before I could stop them. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. Really, look at me. I never stopped loving you, I whispered, my voice trembling. I never even knew I had started, until you let me go. His arms wrapped around me then, pulling me into him like he might fall apart if he let me go again. I buried my face in his chest, clutching him like I had been drowning, and he was the only thing keeping me afloat. We stood there for what felt like forever, holding on to something fragile and real, something we had both been too afraid to claim before. And when he finally pulled back, pressing his forehead to mine, I knew I had never truly left him. We had only just begun to find our way home. The next day dawned gray and restless. Heavy clouds pressed against the Vermont sky, as if the weather itself held its breath. I spent the morning in the small reading room I had claimed as my own, my fingers absently tracing the rim of my teacup while the fire crackled softly in the hearth. Damian hadn't said much after last night. He hadn't needed to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and the way he had held me, like I was something fragile but worth holding on to, had filled every unspoken space between us. And yet, neither of us had said what needed to be said. That this couldn't go on the way it had begun. That this marriage had to be more than debts and obligations if either of us was going to survive it. I set the cup down and stood, pacing toward the tall windows overlooking the gardens below. And then I saw it. Damian, standing alone on the balcony, the place where everything had begun to shift. My heart ached at the sight of him, so still, so distant, as if the weight of the world had finally worn him thin. I don't know what gave me the courage, but I walked, out the door, down the hall. Each step heavier than the last until I reached the glass doors that separated me from him. I paused, my hand trembling on the handle. And then, I pushed it open. The wind caught my breath as I stepped out, the crisp air curling around me like invisible threads pulling me toward him. He didn't turn, didn't move. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't come to return, the ring this time. His shoulders tensed, but he still didn't turn. I took another step, and another, until I stood just behind him, close enough to reach out, but still afraid to touch. I came to ask you something, I said softly, my voice shaking. Something I should have asked long ago. Finally, he turned. His face, so guarded for so long, looked utterly wrecked. His jaw clenched, his eyes rimmed with shadows that spoke of sleepless nights. But when he met my gaze, there was something else too. Something raw, fragile. Ask me, he whispered, as if the words hurt to speak. I took a shaky breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Do you want me here? Because you need to fix what my family broke? I asked, voice cracking. Or do you want me here, because you can't imagine your life without me? The wind stilled, the silence stretching between us like a thread on the verge of snapping. And then, he fell to his knees. Right there, on the cold stone balcony. My breath hitched, tears burning in my throat as I watched the most powerful man I had ever known crumble in front of me. His hands clenched into fists on his thighs, his head bowing, like the weight of the truth had finally knocked him down. I don't want to fix the past anymore, he whispered, his voice shaking. I want to build something new, with you. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I sank to my knees in front of him, reaching for his face with trembling hands. He cupped my hands with his, leaning into my touch like a man starved for something he'd thought he could never have. I need you, Isabel, he breathed, his voice breaking completely. Not because of guilt, not because of debts, because I love you. God help me. I love you. My heart shattered and healed all at once. I leaned in, pressing my forehead to his, our breaths mingling in the space between us. I never wanted to leave you, I whispered through my tears. I just didn't know how to stay without losing myself. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could feel every shuddering breath he took. Then stay as you are, he whispered, as my wife, my partner, my home. The words wrapped around me like the warmest embrace, filling every hollow space in my heart. I nodded, my tears soaking into the fabric of his shirt. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his thumbs brushing away the tears on my cheeks. Marry me again, he whispered, a soft smile breaking across his lips for the first time. Not for contracts, not for debts, for us. I laughed through my tears, nodding again as my heart swelled with something I hadn't dared to feel before, peace. Yes, I breathed. 1,000 times yes. And there, on the same balcony where our walls had first begun to crumble, we sealed a vow that was finally ours alone to keep. A year later, Vermont wore its autumn coat again. Golden leaves blanketed the hills, and the air carried that crisp, woodsy scent that reminded me of home, of childhood, of simpler days before life had tangled itself into knots. I wasn't sure I could ever loosen. But here I stood now, barefoot in the soft grass of Blackidge, Manor's garden, my heart beating slower, steadier, fuller than it ever had. Today wasn't like the first wedding. There were no chandeliers, no cold stares from people who didn't know our names. No suffocating vows whispered for the sake of appearances, It was just us. A small gathering of those who had stayed. My childhood friend Maggie standing quietly with James, Damian's oldest and most trusted confidant. Marcus, standing to his side, and us, standing under the low-hanging branches of a sugar maple tree, where the last golden leaves clung stubbornly to their stems. My dress wasn't silk or satin, or stitched by some designer's hands. It was cotton, simple, soft, flowing like the breeze that swayed through the trees. I had chosen it myself, just like I had chosen this moment, this life, this man. Damian stood before me, wearing nothing more than a dark gray suit, his tie slightly loosened the way I loved, his eyes softer than I had ever imagined they could be. The man who once stood so distant on the cold marble floor now looked at me as if I was the only thing holding him steady in this world. The officiant didn't speak. From a script, he only smiled and nodded when Damian reached for my hands, lacing his fingers through mine with a touch so gentle it brought tears to my eyes. "I don't have vows written on paper," Damian began, his voice quiet, rough with emotion. "I've spent most of my life building things I could control, fortresses, empires, walls too high for anyone to climb." He paused, his thumb brushing along my knuckles. "But then you came, and every wall I'd built crumbled the moment I realized what I stood to lose if I didn't fight for you." Tears blurred my vision as I bit my lip to keep from falling apart. "I don't need vows to prove anything, anymore," he whispered. "Because every day I wake up next to you, every moment you stand beside me, you already give me the only thing I ever wanted. Home." I let out a quiet sob, pressing my hand to my mouth, and everyone around us seemed to vanish into the rustling leaves and golden light. It was my turn. I took a breath, clutching his hands tighter. "You once told me you were afraid I would leave you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But the truth is, I was more afraid of staying, if I didn't know how to love you without losing myself." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "But you never asked me to lose myself," I continued. "You gave me back my freedom, my family's honor, my place in this world, and somehow, in loving you, I found myself again." I leaned closer, our foreheads nearly touching. "So today I choose you, not because I have to, but because I want to, with every breath I have left." Tears shimmered in Damian's eyes as the officiant nodded softly. "I now pronounce you." But Damian didn't wait. He leaned in, cupping my face, and kissed me before another word could be spoken. His lips were warm, steady, tasting of promises I already knew he'd keep. The guests laughed softly, their applause mingling with the rustling leaves as the wind carried us forward into a life we had chosen together. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the hills, I stood in the kitchen of the manor, our home now, not as a guest, not as a prisoner of a contract, but as his wife, his partner, his family. I stood barefoot on the cool stone floor, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air as I reached for 2 mugs on the shelf. I turned to find Damian leaning against the doorway, watching me like I was something fragile and fierce all at once. He smiled. Soft. Real. Easy. I handed him his cup, brushing my fingers lightly over his as he took it. His eyes never left mine. "You ever think," I whispered, leaning into his chest, "that we had to fall apart first, just to find our way back?" He set the cup down, wrapping his arms around me, pulling me close until I could feel the steady rhythm of his heart against mine. "I think," he murmured against my hair, "we had to lose everything, to realize we already had everything we needed." I closed my eyes, breathing him in, letting the warmth of our little kitchen wrap around us like a second skin. And when he whispered again, his voice low and certain, I knew there was nothing left to fear. You are my everything. Mine. Forever. And in that moment, with the scent of coffee in the air and the weight of his love wrapped around me, I knew I had finally found home. Thank you for being part of this heartfelt journey. If this story touched something deep within you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We can't wait to share more stories that warm the heart and inspire the soul. See you in the next one.